Bonjour, and welcome to episode 11 of the Lost Souls podcast. This is Alex, I'm the host, and today we are talking about, well, I hope that I can say this on YouTube and not get banned, but incels. And I guess for anybody who doesn't know, an incel is short for involuntary celibate. Somebody who likes to think that, they are alone, on a virgin, and they are this because of reasons outside their own control, because involuntary, that's the whole point of it. And this is generally what the thought process is, and I'm going to euphemize something because I don't think talking about it and as much as it's probably going to be mentioned is a good thing, and so I'm going to euphemize it as pop shank. If you can't figure that out, just do a little bit of research, okay? And you should be able to get it after I start talking if you have no idea what I'm talking about already. So, pop shank is blamed for giving these men, the incels, an unrealistic expectation for women, all right? So I'm going to try to take this one at a time and try to actually break it down in a way that makes it seem like reasonable, because here's what gets said. It's like, so there's pop shank, and these incels watch pop shank, and then from the pop shank they get an idea of women that isn't true, and this is how that gets euphemized. What they're really saying is that these guys end up wanting girls that are out of their league, and they just need to quit, right? Like, that's the issue, is that they're just going for the wrong girls. Okay, doesn't everybody do that? But whatever. It isn't, I find that to be a ridiculous, way of saying it, because it's like, oh, well, you just, it's like, you can fix it, you just have to not like who you like. It's like, it's not how it works. That's not how it works. And maybe this would be true if you're operating under the assumption that these men just don't find any women attractive in their regular lives. Like, while they're walking around and they're finding people and they're like, oh, just nobody does it for them. And it's like, no, that's really not what's going on here, because because the reason these men are so in their little whatever is because there are actually plenty of women around that they are attracted to and would be interested in. The issue is that they just can't ever deliver. They can't ever get with them. And you go back to what I just said, well, they're just out of their league. They just got to try either to lower down or be better men, what have you, right? And I can only really speak personally, and I don't super identify with the term because I look at it just slightly differently. But it's really not what happens, because these men have tried to go after what they want, right? They try, and then what they get labeled is a creep. They get generally ignored by women, and then they're overall just shamed into not trying at all. And then when these men take that information, this social feedback, and they go, well, I'm just not going to do anything. Well, of course you're unhappy, because it's like, well, I can't even try for the things that I want to go after. I can't try for the relationships I want in this life, and I can't, what the hell do I do? And the in-baked assumption here is that these men are needing to change their preferences because they don't need to want women they like, when I just find that absolutely ridiculous. And I'll tell you why. Because this is probably the only section of the population that actually gets looked at and said that they don't get to have preferences. I'm not trying to put oil on the fire here, but that is literally what they're being told. I mean, not literally, implicitly, because that's the way shit works. But nobody can tell you that, but that's what you need to do, right? And it's like, well, here's the thing, is that's not really something that people have control over, right? You don't have control over what you like. I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but you like what you like, man, and there's not any shame in it. And people act like that's just a ridiculous thing to go for. So they So the women they like don't want them. That is the reality. The women that they like do not want them. But they're supposed to keep going? For what? For women they don't like? I'm supposed to pursue relationships with people that I'm not interested in. Incels are supposed to pursue relationships with people they're not interested in. How the hell do you think that's going to work? Do you think it's going to turn out well for everybody? No, because what's going to happen is these people are just going to do it to do it. They're going to be unhappy in it because they don't want to be there in the first place. And then that's somehow the solution given to like fix the problem, to like let it have it. Like it's not their fault that they just don't waste their time on romantic relationships with people that they don't have romantic interest in. And I don't really think that that's a bad thing, because I'm sorry if we live in a society where people are just assumed to, I don't know, bow down and submit to whatever the whims of the tides are. But some people actually have things they want, and they're never going to accomplish those things just by like bending the knee every time they turn around, right? Because that's half the reason people get in bad situations in the first place, is they're just complacent with the situations around them instead of being like, well, actually I want more, I'm not going to accept less, right? But then that makes them unhappy, and they're like, well, you need to go ahead and reevaluate that. You need to go ahead and just lower those standards a little bit. And it's like, do you even realize what you're talking about? Because like you're telling me to change things I don't have control over. It's not like these guys are going around, I want like a rich woman who's successful and is perfect in every way and is the most attractive person I've ever met. No, they're literally just looking for women that are like, oh, I like them, and that's as complicated as I'm going to make it. That's who I like. I'm not going to go into 20 fucking questions just to try to like disseminate and go through the little intricacies of what I should and should not even pursue, right? But that seems to be such a ridiculous idea to people, and I have no idea why. But here's the thing, is these people get seen as desperate because of all this, right? And desperation is seen as bad. But the only way that they're going to lower their standards to the point that society seems to want them to lower their standards to is to succumb to the absolute depths of desperation. Is to be so desperate they do not care what stands in front of them. To be so desperate that they don't care to go after any woman, period, just because they're a woman. Right? That's what you're asking for here. And you don't see how that's an issue. You don't see how that's actually not what you want. See? And then because of this, the way this works in society, to where they end up having nobody and no one anywhere, they double back on the pop spank, right? Double back on it, because it's the only place they get that kind of gratification anymore, because these people usually grew up and they've had it with them for a very long time. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but I'm saying that's where they get it from, because otherwise they're literally like living less of a life than they would otherwise, even though people might disagree with it. And this might seem like retroactive, like justification for it. And in some ways I'm sure it is. Right? I'm not downplaying that and acting like that's not the case, but it's the same reason that you like. It's the same way it works for addiction, to where it's like you can't have an empty bucket and expect people not to try to fill it, right? Because here's the thing: they might be filling the empty bucket with poison, but an empty bucket is still way worse than something that's filled with something, and that's arguable. But to the person that's the bucket, it's not, right? Because they want something in there, even if it's, not as high quality as what other people would consider it to be. And then because they're shamed and ousted and generally just don't have a chance to make it in the social world like that, they recess into a state to where they're just home all the time, usually playing video games because that's something you can do, or watching movies, or doing what have you. And that's the only place they stand, because they leave and try in the outside world, in the other world. They're just met with a constant state of rejection. And if you're met with a constant state of rejection, of course you're going to avoid that shit. Of course you're just not going to engage with it. Because the only option is just to show up and be there in society and just be content with never having anybody. And you act like, well, nobody in the world is okay with that unless you're asexual. And these people probably aren't, or almost definitely aren't asexuals who just don't want anybody else. Is that like, hey, I'm tired of not being enough for anybody, and I'm done putting myself out there so that people can just tell me over and over and over and over again that I'm not enough for anybody. And then people try to, like, because people are weird like this, and they try to make you feel better, and like, no, that's not the case, that's not the case, that's not the case, when that's not just not what's being reflected to me by society and everybody that's around me. And the world solution is just for you to get out there and deal with it, right? It's just get out there and deal with it. And like, no, like, that's never been an option before. Like, that wasn't the option until you receded into this state in the first place, right? That the option wasn't just to get out there and deal with it. They tried to get out there and deal with it. They tried to get out there and push through it. And the only thing they got was pushback so hard that it pushed them back into their fucking room. People don't see it that way. People don't see it that way. And that's just sad. And I'm going to switch gears and kind of try to explain, like, things from my perspective and how this works. And I'm going to try to use some infographics to try to illustrate these just a little bit better. Because here's what happens, is there's, like, I'm going to use a Venn diagram here. I don't have it before me, so I apologize if it looks a little odd or a little different from how I describe it now. But, like, let's imagine, like, one circle being all of women, right? Like, that's just women. And within this circle, there's a certain set of, like, women that people find attractive, that you specifically find attractive. And this might be a rather large sect of the population. This might be a rather small sect. It's different for everybody. That's what makes us individuals. All right, following. All right. Now, within this sect of women, there's that Venn diagram of people you like. And then there's another Venn diagram, because women also have opinions and wants and feelings. And so there's a whole Venn diagram of women that like you, right? And then when those two overlap, and I wish I could remember what the overlap is actually called, the Venn diagram. This has been like second grade that we went over these, so forgive me for not memorizing every part of a Venn diagram when I was in second grade, Miss Owens. But I forgot. And so that little overlap there, that overlap that you see, that is all of the options a person has, a man has, for romantic relationships, okay? And for some people it's large, and for some people it's small. Now for these incels, that overlap tends to be small or almost non-existent, right? But, like, they have to operate in there. And so the solution that a lot of people see is, well, you need to make your circle bigger. Like, the bounds of this circle aren't dictated by things outside of people's control, right? Because these are, like, situations you had growing up. This is your life that shapes you into this. You realize this, right? And yeah, the pop spank is a part of that, but it's not the whole picture. But people are making it out to be the whole picture, right? Because perhaps that's just how they are. Have you ever considered that? Like, it just so happens to align that way. And yeah, I'm not the biggest on coincidences, but it's like all these experiences add up into what they even like. And have you ever considered that this has been like a recurring theme their whole life, right? Have you ever considered that even before the pop spank, like, this is kind of how they went? They were kind of just overlooked by people anyway, and they kind of just didn't have this sense of community and camaraderie in the way that you would expect them to. And you're looking at this, people look at this, and they're like, well, it's all their fault. I'm saying it's all my fault. That's my personal opinion. It's all my fault, but you're not giving me a reason to want to change it, are you? Because and you should be, well, you just want to be happy, and that's why you should want to change it in the first place. And it's like, you don't understand what it's going to be to take to make me happy. You don't understand that to a lot of these people, what you say is going to make them happy is actually going to make them quite miserable, even more miserable than they already are. Because now they're going to be stuck and locked into something that they never wanted to be a part of in the first place, right? That's not. How does that work? Because you don't look at and expect these women that come out here and say that all guys are pigs and they are done with men, and then they're just looking for a good guy, right? Like, you can look at them and you can be like, well, you just need to choose the right guys, right? But does that mean they ever do? Do those women actually go around and choose the right guy at some point? Or do they just stay there, right? And you all look at it like it's an issue, but it's not an issue as far as this is just what they like, right? And how do you get there? How do you get out of that? Well, I guess it's got to hurt so bad that they decide to change about it, right? But here's the issue. But you get that through experience, right? They get that through repeated and continued experience. And that's kind of why they're like, well, just get them out there. Because what the expectation is that we're just going to get, like, people who are incels are just going to get rejected so many times they just give up, right? Like, they got to go through enough pain and suffering to decide that what they want in a romantic relationship, what they want out of their partners, what they want, and which aren't even like what you think, because you're like, well, they want traditional women who act blah, blah, blah. We don't give a shit. A lot of, maybe some of them do. I personally don't. Like, I don't give a shit about your traditional gender roles and how you're supposed to stay at home or be a submissive wife or any of these things that people say. I just want somebody to fucking love me and that I feel the same way for it. That's as actual complicated as it gets. Is that I just want a reciprocal relationship to where I like you, you like me, and we can both agree on that point and we can move forward. But that seems like a fairy tale, and I'm not sure if it's just this society or if it's some other magical or mystical or fate working thing going on here. Maybe, I don't know. And I wish I had the answers to like provide to people to make this seem like it's better, or even to just help me get through this, because I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do to actually be content, because people are like, you just need to, like, essentially the option is just to go be with people you don't want to be with, but that's not, it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. That's not an expectation forced or put upon anybody else. Do you understand this? Do you understand this? And and this isn't even like, this is men getting in on it too, because men will like do this and be like blah, blah, blah. And so I'm just going to use myself as a personal example because I'm trying to illustrate this in a way, right? When it comes to me personally, I like women of the more slender variety. And I'm trying not to be offensive or anything because I'm not exactly in the best shape myself. And then I know hear that hypocrite. And it's like, if I had control over what I found attractive, man, do you think that I would be alone? If these men had control over what they found attractive, do you 100% think that they wouldn't date other women? If they could just turn that part of them off and just be happy with whatever and like whatever, do you think that they wouldn't do that? Do you think that isn't something they would do? Do you think they actually like being alone and miserable and never having anybody in their lives over the course of the entire thing? Absolutely not. You're stuck up on the idea that it's a kind of choice in the same way that sexuality is not a choice. In any other part of sexuality, in any other part of it, anywhere in the world, people are like, well, it's not a choice, it's just who you are. But when it comes to incels specifically, it's a choice now. And that's how they fix it. Right? Because it's their fault. Well, but this is like the whole idea, and this is the thing, is like the whole situation and perspective has kind of shifted on things like addiction, because there's a certain level of control that like an addict has before they have their first drink or something like that, right? There's that certain level of control, but there's also the recognition that there's a lot that's outside of their control that just ends up taking them over, right? And so a lot now when you say like, oh, well, you made that choice. Like that's the opinion of some. Like, well, you made that choice to do that thing for the first time, and so it's your fault you're a drug addict now. It's your fault you shoot up heroin, right? And that ends up being that not even prevailing anymore. That's being walked back. But let's take that same framework, that same thought process, and apply it to incels. And in fact, the opposite gets reversed, right? To where it's now like, well, it's completely your fault, and you need to do something about it. Assuming they never tried. Because here's what I've went through. And if I had to guess, I don't know this. I'm not a part of that community because I don't want to get sucked in. I realize when you start being a part of communities, you start identifying with communities, and you really end up getting sucked into them. And I kind of want to stay as almost kind of an outside observer in the case, so I can give what I hope is some kind of perspective that is towing some line that allows it to be like good, or not good, but like at least productive in some way. Okay. And because here's what I did. I realized there were things about myself I could change in order to be more appealing or palatable or what have you. And so I undertook the process to change those things, right? Part of that for me was losing weight, trying to be a more understanding, kind individual, because I can be, I could be a rather bitter and argumentative person if that isn't obvious. And I tried to work on that to some extent while being more open and trying to be, more easy on myself and more easy on other people, and trying to be understanding and going through this whole like finding yourself process, which I'm not sure anybody ever completely gets through, or maybe they do and I'm just bad at it, right? But you go through that and you put in all this effort because you're like, I'm tired of this and I want to change it, right? Because that's what it means to want to change something, is you want a better outcome. And so you go through and you try to get that better outcome you're searching for, and the only thing that you actually get met with is more of the same stuff that you were running into before, right? It's like nothing ever changed, even though I changed a lot, and now it's just the same, and maybe not worse. It can't be objectively worse. Well, actually, in some way, it was worse, because now you're just looked at a little differently, right? But they go through that process, and they say that, I mean, I put years into it. It wasn't just like, oh, I'm gonna do this for a few months. No, this was years of my life I put into this process, only to get to the end and realize it was worth nothing at the end of it. It was actually worth nothing, and I just wasted every last bit of the time that I had put toward it, because looking for a goal that I would never achieve, right? So what do you do there? Like, what am I supposed to do? Keep pushing, and you succumb to the sunk cost fallacy? Because here's the thing: is you start getting the feedback that no matter what you do, it's not going to change, and you just the whole reason you decided to change in the first place is just something that can never be affected at all, period. And you just got to live your life like that. Well, that changes things, because nobody wants to live a life all alone. Nobody wants to live a life where they're just got to do it all by themselves. Right? And I know I hear it now. Well, if all you're caring about is loneliness, you could find somebody to be a partner. And it's like, well, I also want the whole partner experience. I don't want it to just be like surface level. I'm not an asexual, right? I do have a certain level of sexuality that I want to explore and be in that, like, integrate as a part of myself, but it's not being allowed. And I was going to say I'm not upset about it, but I guess if I'm even talking about it, it upsets me in some way. I'm not angry about it. Like, I understand. I think I was angry at one point. Like, I went through periods of anger. So at some points I get angry on it, but then there becomes acceptance. And so I'm accepting of it, but in the process of being accepting of it, it's not like I don't know. It's not like I'm happy with it. Like, you can accept something and not be happy with it. I can accept situations and not be like, oh, I love this, right? And I just personally wish that I knew the answers, right? Because that's what it's all about, right? Maybe there are no answers in this world. Maybe there is no absolute truth that anybody has to find out. I don't know. I spent a long time searching for them, and the only thing I've really come up with is that nobody really knows. Nobody really knows. And it's just about putting one foot in front of the other until you can't anymore, I guess. And that isn't nice. That isn't what people want to hear, but it's the truth, I fear. And since, yeah, I think that's all I got to say on it. I'm going to try to make these a little shorter and do them more often. I don't know. Maybe that'll affect something. Anyway, if you're not upset with me for sharing my opinion, or you agree or disagree or whatever, let me know. I do want to see other perspectives on it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to agree with you on them. And, yeah, peace. I know I said peace, but I'm going to start adding poems to the end. I thought maybe putting them at the beginning would grab some people's attention, but I'll put them at the end, so they're only put in front of people who might actually wish to hear them. So, here's a poem, Forbidden Delight. The frigid air follows me through the night, pulling me in and stripping my life, bleeding me dry with the dullest of knives. I turn to my left and then turn to my right, realizing the darkness surrounds with no white light in sight, giving up goals for which I strive, all to be lonely and barely alive. To keep peace, I choose to just hide, When I show my face, my patience is tried. Nobody cares when it's only my plight. There isn't a care in the world I can find, but I can live in misery as long as I abide. I lie alone with the shambles of life. Picking my poison, I make my own world bright. Only for moments, as the feeling never lasts. At least I felt wanted, but it's gone with a flash.